Hello everyone, this is the Grade 11 Theory Lesson Unit 4B, and today's topic is four-note triad voicing doubled notes. So, as you might have guessed from the topic, the four-note voicing, so it's necessary to expand a triad, or three notes, into the traditional four voices of harmony, those being soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those terms, and they do apply to instrumental composition, as well as vocal composition. So each of the four parts, we refer to them as a voice, regardless if we're talking voices as in the case with choirs or if actual wind instruments. So with only three pitches in a triad, it's necessary to double or to use one of the pitches twice. And in order to double the correct pitch, there's a following set of rules that are going to have to be adhered to. And so the first one is, in a root position triad, you double the root of the triad. The second rule is if a triad is in first inversion, you are going to be doubling basically a tonal note. So if there's a 1, a 4, or a 5 of the key, and that's in the bass, you're going to be doubling that note. If there isn't, you're going to find a tonal note in one of the other voices, and you're going to double that note. And then the third rule for triad voicing is if it's in second inversion, you are going to be doubling the bass, or in other words, the fifth of the chord. So when we expand our voicing, or our basic triads, and we go to the grand staff, well, four-part music is written in the grand staff with the soprano and the alto voices located in the treble clef, and the tenor and the bass voices located in the bass clef. And the following rules when writing triads in four voices need to be adhered to. So in your learning guide, we've got the voice range of the different voices, and each part has to be adhered to in their specific ranges. So soprano voices extend from middle C to the A above staff. Alto voices share the same range, but their extension goes down to a low G, and it goes up to the D, fourth line of the staff. Tenor voices are in the bass clef, as are bass voices, and the tenor voice extends from the C, second bass clef, up to the high G, above the staff, and then the bass voice is a low D up to an A above the staff. And so when we're voicing our triads, we need to be adhering these rules as well. And a couple more rules just going through your guide. So distances that occur between voices. So distances between voices, if it's a bass and a tenor voice, i.e. both notes in the bass clef, any distance between the bass and the tenor is allowed. Octaves, fourths, fifths, those are all very common. And then the distances between the tenor, the alto, and the soprano, those voices can be written between a unison and an octave between each of the voices. So remember, tenor voice, again, it is in the bass clef, but it's the distance between that voice, the alto voice, and soprano voice. There are different circumstances that we need to watch with that as well. And then we can talk about stem direction and part crossing. So stems for the top voice in each clef will go up. So this contrasts rules we learned in grade 9 with stem direction in each of the staves, meaning if it's above the middle line, generally the stem would go down and to the right, and if it was below the middle line, it would go up and to the left. Obviously, melodic content would dictate that direction as well. However, in this case, we're going to be doing it not based on that. So we need to show have stem directions in each of the staves in different directions, and what that allows is for basically just cleans up the music and allows us to really see what's taking place. It's easier to understand. And then stems for the bottom voice, it's the same thing. So the tenor voice stem will go up, and the bass stem will go down. You may not cross a part, so in other words, the alto part cannot be written higher than the soprano part, and we'll look at that as we go through too. And then the last thing is voicing. So once the correct bass pitch has been written, the remaining three pitches may be written in any of the remaining voices. So this means that there may be many acceptable combinations or voicings for each triad, also remembering the distances between the voices and some of the rules. But there are more than one way that you can be showcasing your doubling it and writing of triads in the voices. So we're going to look at a couple examples. These are all taken, as the other lessons, these are all taken from your learning guide. I think there's about 3 or 4, I think, in each one, or showing the different inversions and things. So I'm just going to pull one from each. So I've got on the board, we're going to do a root position triad in the key of D minor with the dominant chord. We're going to do a first inversion triad in the key of C major using the mediant triad and first inversion. We're going to do a first inversion chord in G major using the subdominant. And then we're going to do a second inversion chord or triad voiced in the key of B minor, and that one's going to be in second inversion, a tonic chord for that one. So the first step for doing any of these when you're writing them out, and again, just as noted in the guide there, stem direction doesn't apply when whole notes, so we'll just do whole notes because I'm trying to condense everything and compact it all into the frame on your screen, and so room is a little bit trickier. So we're going to do the first one, D minor. So that's the third example in your learning guide for root position. So the notes are already in your guide, but we're going to go through and just walk through the steps for determining how we're going to do this. So the first step is looking at what the key is and then drawing the key signature. That's already been done. So D minor, again, is the relative minor of F major with one flat. We also need to remember, since we're dealing with a minor key, that rule that we're using harmonic minor scale. So the seventh note of D minor will be raised. We have to make sure we remember to do that. Remember, that's unlike major scales where you actually don't alter the pitches relative to the key signature, but in minor keys we have to because we're using the harmonic minor. So in this case, there should be, or C sharps would be raised as the seventh note should we come across a C sharp. If you've been practicing your triads and doing these in your other lessons, you probably know by now that dominant triads in a minor key do contain the raised seventh of the key. So there will be a C sharp in this chord. So let's look at the notes that exist in this triad, and we'll just write them out in root position. So the root note, and again, we're basing the root note on the fifth degree of this key. So in D minor, the fifth note, D, E, F, G, A. So the A is going to be the root. The third is going to be C, but remember, it's the raised seventh of D minor. That happens to be C, so we need to make sure that a C sharp. That also gives us the major third interval, which allows for this triad to be a major triad. And then the fifth, so we need to have an E. So those are our three notes that we're going to be voicing for this first triad in root position. So because we're in root position, we have to go and we have to go back to the rules for, not just because first position, but with any triad there are these specific rules. So the first position triad, the rule states that you must double the root of the triad. So in this case, with these three notes, because we know we're going to be doubling one of these pitches, and because we're in root position, the rule says double the root. So we should have two A's in this triad. So I'm going to go ahead and voice this triad. So I'm going to start, and when we're drawing triads or voicing triads into the different voices, practice for many people is to do from the bass voices and work your way up. You don't have to do that. You can go in any direction you like, but whatever method you decide to do, just remain consistent with it so that you don't confuse yourself. So I'm just going to voice it out. A, there's my bass voice. Remember my range for my bass voice. I can go as high as this range as an A above the staff, but then again I'm going to be crossing into voices, so I don't want to be doing that. So I'm going to be containing it so that I'm not crowding into the territory of another voice. So I have my A. I'm going to go ahead now that I've got that note established. I'm going to voice my C sharp. So this is my tenor voice, and tenor voice, that's fine. Remember, it can go any distance between those voices is acceptable so far, and I can extend it up to the G above the staff, but I'm not going to do that. So there's our C sharp. We also need to have an E as our alto voice, and that's fine. Remember that those notes, those are contained with an octave, or between a unison and an octave, because this middle C is actually right. It's just one below here in this staff, so that's a third above. That's totally acceptable. And then we need to have our soprano voice above that, which is an A. Again, because that's the note we're going to be doubling. So we can just notate these like that. Don't do this when you're doing in your work, but just to illustrate, for illustrative purposes right now, there's our doubled pitch, right? There's our two A's, root position. So there we go. There's a dominant triad in D minor in root position. Looking at your next example, we're going to do a first inversion triad, and these examples will contain a bass note that is either a tonal note of 1, 4, or 5 of the key that we're in. So we are in the key of C major in this example, so we've drawn our key signature for C major, no sharps or flats. So now the next thing we need to do is locate and determine what the third note of this is. So it's a minor chord, we know that, based on our lowercase Roman numeral. We're in first inversion. So C minor, what are root note, what's the third, and what's the fifth? In other words, what are the three notes? So C, we need to have as our root, not C. It's based on the third. So the third note of C major is an E. So we're basing, this on E. So we're going to have an E as the root. The third in this case is going to be a G. Because we're in C major, again, we're not altering any of the pitches. So it's just a B natural. And then we've got a B. We are in first inversion. So then these notes are going to get rearranged so that we've got the third. So again, we can imagine the simplest way to imagine that. So if I rearrange these notes, I'm going to have G, B, and then I'm going to have an E. Okay, so this is what I'm going to want for the order of my notes in first inversion for this particular triad. So now I go ahead and I voice that triad. In first inversion, the third is in the bass. So that's what I'm going to have to do here. So I've got my G. The next note that I need to have is I need to have my B for this triad. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that. In your guide, actually, maybe what I'll do is I'll voice these the same as what you've got in your guide. So there's the G, there's the B, so I'll get rid of this G just to keep things consistent. It could have gone there, that's fine, but we're going to, we'll just follow what we've got here. So there's the G, the B, so we need an E now. So what we're left now is we have to figure out what the fourth note, or the note we need to double, and what note that's going to be. So the rule states, if the bass note is a 1, a 4, or a 5 of the key in which you're in, you're going to be doubling that note. So the notes G, B, and E. So what this is referring to is in the key of C major, are any of these notes the first note, the fourth note, or the fifth note of the scale? And the answer is yeah, the G is the fifth of C major. So that's the only note that, in this case, that we have. And if we have a note that's 1, a 4, or a 5 of the key, that's the note that gets doubled. So that's why in this example there are 2 Gs. And again, in your guide it's illustrating these as the fifth note of C major, which they are. So there we go. There's first inversion, C major, with the mediate triad and first inversion of that triad. So we're going to look at another one. This time we're going to go to a first inversion triad, and it could be a bass note. In this case, it will be a bass note, other than a 1, a 4, or a 5 as the tonal note. So G major, we're going to do the subdominant, and this is also going to be in first inversion. So G major, what are the notes that we need? We've got our key drawn in here. So we ask ourselves, what's the fourth note of G major? G, A, B, and C. So we have C, E, and G as our root, as our third, as our fifth. Remember, we're doing this in first inversion. So this is going to go up. We're now going to have E, G, and C. That's the order that I want when I'm voicing my triad. I need to have an E in the bass. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Write in my E as my bass note. And then after this, I'm going to have my G. I'm going to go ahead for this question. E, C, and G. So I need to have my C in this question. So I'm going to add my C here. And then I need to determine which note I'm going to be doubling. And the rule again, if it's other than a 1, a 4, or 5, you're going to be doubling that pitch. So we're going to go through, and the G in this case is the 1. So that's the note again for this question that we're going to be doubling. So we're going to go ahead and add another G. And so that's why in your guide it's showing it as the first note that's doubled. The E in this case is actually, even though it's in the bass, it's actually this for illustration purposes, this is actually the 6, right? This is the submedian of this particular question. There's the tonic. But just to illustrate, first inversion, in this example, the sixth note of G is in the bass, so that's not the note we're going to be doubling. But we do have another note that we can double, and again, we just simply go through the order. The 4 is a tonal note, right? So the C, if G major, could have been a doubled note, but we had a G, so we're always going to follow that sequence. Whichever one occurs first is the note that gets doubled. So G happens to be it, that's the one we're going to double. And then finally, let's look at a second inversion. So this one, we're going to be using, and this is in the key of B minor. We're asked to draw the tonic triad in second inversion. So B minor, the notes that we need to use, key signature's done for us, but remember also back to a minor key, so the 7th note needs to be raised by a semitone if it occurs for us. And in this question, because we're doing the tonic, we don't have to worry about that, but it is still at play should we have had to write another chord. So we need to determine what the notes are. So it's the 1 based on B minor, so B, D, and F sharp are going to be our 3 notes if we're in root position, and again, we'll just remain consistent with how we're doing it here. B, D, and our F sharp. Now, it is in second inversion, which means the simplest way to, again, imagine is the 5th is going to be coming down, so we're going to have F sharp, B, and D. That's the sequence of notes in the order in which we want to be writing these down in this question. So, in the key of B minor, first inversion tonic triad, so our bass note is going to be that F sharp. Moving up, the next note we need is a B for our tenor voice. We're going to go ahead and put it there. And then we need to have a D. So we're going to go ahead and put our D there. Now we don't want, again, just for the rules, we couldn't have put a D up here, even though that's the voice of the alto. That would have been a distance too great between the tenor and the alto voices. And then the last note is step is to determine which note are we going to be doubling. Well, the rule states for second inversion triads, you double the root, or in this, which is actually the 5th of the chord. So we're going to be having in this question another F sharp. And so there we go. We've got our root F sharp. In this case, in second inversion, right? There's the B, which in this is actually the root. Our 3rd and our 5th, but we've doubled the correct pitch based on the key that we're in. So there are a series of questions that you need to do in your guide, going through these, and lots of practice doing them. So there's a total of 10 different triads that you're going to be asked to voice using the grand staff. And then once you've done that, you are going to be asked to voice the 4 different types of triads below each of the given notes. And you've been given one note in that question. You've been given a G. And so basically you have to treat these questions as like an interval. So, in terms of doubling the pitches, we don't really have enough information to go by other than the fact that there's a G given there. So safe to assume these are all going to be in root position. So that means the G will be the doubled pitch, which means you'll be, you can be doing tonic triads basically for this question, and then you need to determine the variations. So really this question's asking you to voice it into 4 parts, but then, show how the chords themselves are actually changing. So what, a root position G minor, major, augmented and diminished, voiced correctly, doubled correctly, but just to illustrate and show the differences that are taking place. And then last, you have to write out as many examples as you feel comfortable so that you become very much comfortable with this. So, in terms of what I'm expecting for this unit, write out the 10 different triads or voice triads, and then also fill in that section with the major, minor, diminished, augmented, create a PDF, and submit that file as a PDF, and also submit it as a MuseScore file. And then I can use that to do the assessment for this unit. If you wish to show me some, or have some other questions, treat the next part, as many examples, come up with your own if you like, submit those. I can have a look at those as well, but I will be, basically I'll only be marking, I guess, page 4 of this guide, so that one page for this learning guide. So there we go. There's today's lesson. on 4B, and that's voicing triads in 4 parts and then determining which of those notes, based on the way it's voiced and the inversion they're in, which notes get doubled.